Brilliant. Hi, everyone. So today we're going to go through global mobility and talk through some of the key trends that we're seeing in global mobility, some of the risk landscape that's around at the moment, followed by a little bit of technical on remote working, and then some common misconceptions and pitfalls with global mobility. Um, I guess just to set the scene of, I guess, what global mobility is, just very, very broadly, this is very much about the movement of people and movement of employees across international borders. So whenever someone crosses a border, there are considerations that are needed from an employer perspective. So this looks at tax and social security. Tax could be personal income tax, withholding taxes, even corporation taxes in some cases, and then starting to think about some of the wider considerations. So employee engagement, employment law. So I guess just to start with, to think about some of the key trends in global mobility that we've seen in the last few years. Chris just mentioned there, COVID, post-COVID world, we still say that word, but we are definitely there. Thinking pre-COVID, global mobility was very much about the traditional long international assignment, someone going for 2 or 3 years, or a permanent relocation. In this new world now, we haven't seen any significant return to that sort of traditional international assignment from what we saw, say, 5, 6 years ago. They're still very much there, but very business specific. If someone, say, has to be on site, or a new jurisdiction is being opened up into. What we are seeing now, though, in this world is business travel increasing. So 2019 is really the last benchmark that we go to. What we haven't seen is the same number of business travelers, but what we do see is when we do have a requirement to travel, those trips are longer and slightly more regular. A worthy comment here as well is looking at cost of business travel. We are exceeding what we were spending in 2019. That's very much down to price of hotels, price of flights coming in. So more regular business travel, longer, more regular trips. And I guess that's probably our first risk landscape to comment on. I will talk about that in a second, but have we replaced the traditional assignment with these business travel? And sort of the regulatory compliance aspects being considered for business travelers in the same way that would have been done for an international assignment. So if you do have significant business travel, really understanding where your people are and what they're doing is going to be fundamental. This new landscape that we're in now has really changed global mobility for how people go to locations. So we have global commuters, particularly in Europe. Crossing an international border is so easy. So we've now got this new phase of people living in one country but working in another. European Union, very easy. Within the United Kingdom, we have the same thing with Ireland. To a certain extent, we have the same thing, say, with the Netherlands or France and the UK. So someone who lives in one country but works in another, that is creating a compliance headache for employers as well, because we have to consider at that point, where is tax actually going to be paid? What's my employer obligation here for paying social security, for paying income taxes? What's the employment law? And that will very much delve on in a few minutes. And these other alternative employment structures is very much where we're landing now. So I've put here employers of record or consultancy models. So this is very much where people are looking to hire someone in a location where they say don't have an entity, but they're saying, actually, I want that person. I have a global talent pool. Let's find someone outside, say, the UK. But how do I engage with them? So an employer of record is being used, which is essentially the outsourcing of the labor responsibility. So an employer retains management and control of the individual, but HR processes, pension, withholding is all managed by the employer of record. Or we see consultancy models where we're using, say, a contingent labor force as an employee. And these also create risks for the employer, because we start getting to a phase of an employer having a presence in that other country, and what is the obligation that happens in that location. And wrapping that all up is the key thing that we're seeing is this rise in corporate consciousness and regulatory compliance. we are seeing a lot more employers now say, actually, we're proactively going to look at our people. We're trying to understand where they are in the world. The development of policy is increasing. I saw a statistic the other day that said it's only a little over half of employers actually have a formal business travel policy that is adhered to. That is now going up. So employers are actively looking to say, we need to understand where you are, and we need to understand what you're doing, and is what you're doing within our guidelines and parameters. So sorry about that. I think I froze for just a minute. Uh, Look at the current risk landscape here. So we have a few things that employers really do need to focus on. This concept of hidden mobility is really fundamental now. So when we used to have, say, a permanent relocation or an international assignment, it was very easy to understand where that person was going to. There was an understanding that they would move payrolls. Immigration was considered. Um, we're now in this new phase of remote hybrid working, commuters, business travel, replacing this to a certain degree. So, um, tracking and understanding where your people are in the world has become infinitely harder. So, one of the biggest things that we need to stress now is that the authorities are really actively wanting employers to understand this, and not only understand where their people are, but also to proactively monitor what they're doing and look at what the obligations are in those locations. So, for example, very briefly, the UK, we have a requirement to report all inbound business travelers to the UK. Ireland has something similar. So those authorities are actually expecting tracking, monitoring, understanding. We've seen protectionist immigration strategies. So we would have seen in the UK the increase in the salary thresholds for skilled worker visas. If anyone's read the news, we've seen obviously the United States and their immigration approach at the moment. So the fundamental point here is, if you're having people go into a location, making sure you've got the right immigration clearance is very, very key. Having an illegal worker in a location because, for example, they haven't got a skilled worker, so they're going to come in on an electronic authorization. That's not going to be compatible with immigration law. All of this in the risk landscape, though, has created this compliance complexity. So now we have people all over the world jumping on planes, trains, automobiles, going to different countries. So these new working arrangements are creating more complex scenarios, and they create more compliance. Um, just a couple of other points here before I jump into remote working. We're seeing, and we've heard a lot about this earlier, geopolitical stability. Um, I've had international people get nervous about going into a certain location because of certain strategies that those governments are putting in place, particularly, say, around immigration. So employers are having to actively coach employees when they're going to a border to say, actually, this is what you should be saying to make sure you're sticking within the rules. We've seen conflicts around the world, so obviously we've got a number of those now, but how are those impacting people crossing borders? And then finally, on this risk landscape, data. This is a really key thing at the moment. Authorities and businesses have more data than ever. We should be able to track and understand where people are, but I guess the point is, what are you doing with that data? And what are the authorities doing with it? So if you know where people are going to, if you can get travel data, actively reviewing that and the roles that people are doing is really one of the expectations now. We have authorities, so Australia, Singapore are examples where immigration and tax talk to each other. And it's a very, very short leap from, say, the Home Office in the UK to HMRC. We already see national insurance numbers are part of an immigration permit now. So that link for immigration and tax is there. So making sure that you use that data appropriately is key. Just a couple of pieces, and I did want some technical in here a little bit, but this rise in global remote working, international hiring. So the world is our talent pool now. What used to be we had to hire in our city, expanded out to our country, but now we've expanded international hiring to the world. And this is a compliance almost a compliance nightmare for employers. Still manageable, but making sure you undertake all the reviews is going to be key. So a lot of people start with, let's make sure we get tax right. But that is going to be key, and we'll talk about that in a second. But really making sure that you don't just look at tax and social security in isolation. So we have employment regulations that vary across the whole world. So making sure that you're meeting all of those expectations when you're hiring or allowing remote working. So things like maternity pay, paternity pay, holiday allowances, they're different. And if, for example, looking at that next point, you were to just put someone on a UK contract, well, that contract very well may not be compatible with the new working location. So really making sure you focus not just on tax and social security, but the whole wider picture of what your obligations are. One of the key things here as well is the risk in the creation of a permanent establishment. So if we take an employee working in another country, if they're essentially acting on behalf of the business, are they dragging that business into the local tax landscape? So things like signing, negotiating contracts, there's wider things than that. But if we have someone remotely working in a location, are we creating a corporate presence for the employer in that location? So really understanding the role that someone is doing is going to be key. And then just thinking of those payroll type obligations. If you have someone hired outside, say, the UK, do you have a payroll obligation in that location for, say, income tax and social security? Different rules around the world govern this, but for the most part, social security is a payroll obligation. So there can be a very high likelihood that you trigger a payroll obligation in the overseas location when you have someone coming in there. So with this global remote working, international hiring, really making sure that you consider the whole scenario, what the person's doing, where they're going, and what your compliance is key. Because again, if the individual, say, does a tax return, your name's going to be mentioned and there, say, as employment income. So again, it's a very short leap to say, well, actually, should you have been operating payroll? Is social security in the right place? And before I hand back to Chris for a short comfort break, I just wanted to have a couple of common pitfalls and misconceptions in here. And there's just three examples of what my clients say to me so often. The first one being, let's say we have someone traveling to a location and there's a double tax treaty, and the double tax treaty might be trying to say that there's no tax due in the host location. So I hear constantly, my employees never go to a location for more than 183 days. It's all okay. That's false. The 183 days is one of the conditions that have to be looked at, but there's more. So we have where the individual's costs are borne as a consideration. And we also look at not only who the legal employer is, but many locations look at the economic employer. So it's very possible that someone traveling to a location for 183 days or less can actually trigger tax there. Another one, we've got no entity in that location. We don't have to do anything. Again, that's false. As I mentioned just before, you could trigger a social security obligation without having an entity in a location. So thinking that you've got no entity, you're fine from a local perspective, again, is a misconception that really needs to be avoided. And then this is another common one that really just says, who has the obligation here? Is it the employee or the employer? And again, so often I hear, my employee can manage their own tax. It's nothing for us to do. Again, and that's going to be false, because there can be possibility that you have to deal with something. Some locations, for example, you can't pay employment income tax via a tax return. It's via a payroll. So again, that brings an obligation to an employer. So I guess the overall points that I'm trying to get over here is that the world is complex. Um, it is going to get more complex, but it's all manageable if the right advice is taken at the right point. So managing compliance in all of these scenarios is going to be far easier if it's before the fact. Unwinding something after the fact is a lot more complex and a lot more time consuming. So big picture, we should be reviewing things as they go along, track and understand where your people are in the world, what they're doing, and then fundamentally, are you creating any obligations that need to be looked at? So I think that is what I'm going to cover on global mobility. I'm just going to pass back to Chris, who's next to me, for a quick wrap up.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. Yeah, really, a really key area, and uh, an area that creates a lot of risk for a lot of businesses in this day and age. And the two countries that we see as that create a red flag the most is probably France, because of the high social security, and India, because of the low thresholds that will create local tax filings in relation to the individual, but also in relation to the, say, UK parent that employs that individual, etc. So yeah, an area to be ahead of the curve on, not behind, because as we know, HMRC have got a lot more resource at their disposal. We're going to be a lot more tougher in relation to employment duties, reviews, etc., etc.